All right. So, can you tell us a little bit about your book? I mean, when I first looked at the title of it, it seemed like it would be quite controversial. But I've read the overview. I apologize, I haven't gotten to read the whole thing yet. And a lot of reviews and people are saying about it, and it seems like really, really well received. And so it seems like you're really onto something here. Can you just tell us a little bit about this sort of different view that you have on the system? And the book, by the way, is called Feminist War on Crime, The Unexpected Role of Women's Liberation in Mass Incarceration.
Yeah, obviously when you read the title, you could think this is going to be some sort of anti-feminism book. But, I've been a feminist since I was in high school, a protesting, out on the streets, women with a Y feminist. So I really have a lot of sympathies for gender justice and the pursuit of equal rights for women. That's absolutely something that I'm very passionate about. However, later in life, I noticed, because I had wanted to be a public defender forever. I talk a little bit about, I'm not even sure I talk about this in the book, but my mother was in an internment camp in World War II. She's Japanese. And so, I had grown up hearing the stories of her entire family. Her father, was forced at gunpoint to do labor there, and just, the stories of that massive race-based detention. And so I knew probably from when I was 14, 15, I wanted to be a public defender, or something along that kind of a line. And to me, this just seemed fine. You could be a feminist, you could want to be a public defender. That's great. And then sort of as I went through school and got to law school, I found myself in this dilemma where when you study some of the feminist legal theory, it really does sound violence against women. So there's this idea that rape and domestic violence are pretty much the main things that are keeping women oppressed. Those are the main markers of women's subordinated status, that the criminal law hasn't been tough enough on these things, and that therefore feminism means supporting tough criminal law. And I had this dilemma. Okay, I want to be a public defender. I want to represent people who do not have the means to hire a private lawyer from this awesome carceral power of the state, right? Like, the state has all the resources and they put people in jail. And jail, is a horrible place. We're finding that out more and more with the stories of COVID. So I knew I wanted to be that, but at the same time, I was dreading this idea of representing batterers and rapists. Like, how could I ever represent those bad men? We need more jail for them, not less. So this was kind of the dilemma that I wrestled with for the last 25 years. And then I started practicing in these specialized domestic violence courts. And they're courts that really were pushed by feminists. And they are the courts that take violence against women seriously. And what I found was it was less of a dilemma than I thought. These courts were places where you saw people of color, Black and brown men and women, in this sort of revolving door of incarceration. So they'd be arrested, put in jail, lose their job, arrested again. You would see women who didn't necessarily want to separate from their partners, calling the police for help, but they ended up triggering this penal machine of mandatory arrest, mandatory prosecution, incarceration that led to these really bad outcomes. They could lose children, they could lose public housing. Immigrant women could find their husbands deported. They could even find themselves deportable. So I realized in the end that this idea of being really tough on men who commit bad acts against women was very appealing as a feminist. Right? Just like the idea of punishing robbers, punishing burglars, right? Punishing anybody who commits a crime. It's a very instinctual and appealing sentiment. If they go to jail, they won't do it. Other people won't do it. Life will be great. But the practice of incarcerating people and subjecting them to state violence turned out not to be a solution to anything, and most especially violence against women. It just sort of exacerbated the situation. So, I figured that if I could talk to feminists who were progressives, who believed in Black Lives Matter and gender justice and all of that, and convince them that policing and criminal law was not the solution to inequality, that then they could go out and convince more people, and we could have this consensus that for over a half century, we've looked at these social problems of poverty, despair, discrimination, and we've thrown a lot of masculine and violent policing and imprisonment against it. And it's just really been a huge human rights disaster. So I felt like if I can talk to my people and convince them of something that, experience had to convince me of, that, maybe this would help. So that was kind of like how I came to it. To answer your question, yes, in some circles, it's really controversial. But I think, with the post George Floyd murder protests and Breonna Taylor and all this energy where people are realizing like this policing was supposed to serve and protect. And it's always been about managing the most marginalized people among us and putting them in a revolving cycle of jail. I think the book has gotten more sympathy than it would have gotten if it had come out in the height of Me Too, where everybody was really zero tolerance, because of Harvey Weinstein.